I remember years ago, I went to a fundraiser. This story will illustrate like how to remember names. There's 2,000 people. I was like the first one at our table that was assigned to me. And when I sit down, a short while after, Forrest Whitaker, the actor, sits right next to me. And then Richard Branson sits next to him. And then Ashton Kutcher and his twin brother, which I didn't realize he had a twin brother. And then President Clinton sits right next to me. And politics aside, right? But this is what happened. He remembered my name when he sat down. He greeted me by my name. And I had met him a few years earlier, and it was very brief. But he remembered my name. And I was like, wow. And I was like, oh, they told him who was sitting at his table, obviously. And then I swear he picks up the conversation we had 3 years earlier. Now, nobody was privy to that. And I was like, dude, I had to say, excuse me, I'm a memory guy. How do you do this? Right. And he's telling me that his grandfather in Arkansas in the living room would tell stories to the kids. But afterwards he would quiz each one individually to see if they were paying attention. Right. And when he's explained this to me, this is the lesson. I felt this like ease, but also I was like, this is weird. Like, I feel like I'm the only one in the room. There are much more important people in this room, certainly at this table, than me, but he made me feel like I was the only one. Have you ever met someone like that?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And it was just like that kind of feeling where, and I think again, politics aside, his ability, he's known as a great communicator, charismatic, a great connector, but he has this incredible memory and powerful presence. And I think his incredible memory and his powerful presence comes from being powerfully present. And I feel like a lot of times when we're meeting people at a party or at a wedding or at work, we're not there, right? Even if people write down the word listen, if they're taking notes, we can turn this into a little master class again. Or even in your mind, look at the word listen in your mind. And as a brain game, switch the letters around and scramble them. It also spells another word perfectly. It spells the word silent. As a reminder, just, hey, don't be thinking about what you're going to say. Just people, just like listen. And then you're more likely to remember it. And then finally, the other M in mom are the methods, which are a lot of them. And I'll go through one really quick one. When you're at an event, you want to remember names. As you're checking yourself in the mirror, say to yourself, I'm going to be suave, right? And it's kind of just a fun like acronym. The S, when you meet somebody, they introduce themselves. S, say the name. Say it back to them. Because it means you get to hear it twice, once from them and once for yourself. Plus, if you're in an environment where there's a lot of noise, you want to make sure you know you heard the name right. You don't want to have a 30-minute conversation with Ted and say goodbye, Ed, right? You want to make sure you get corrected up front. So that's the S, say. The U, use the name in the conversation, and not abuse it. You don't say, Paul, I've been looking forward to this conversation. Paul, what do you want to talk, Paul? That would be an abuse, right? But you want to use it 3 or 4 times in the context of the conversation. The A in suave, the acronym is ask. Have you ever met somebody whose name you haven't heard before, like it's a unique name? What can you ask about a person's name? You could ask, how do I spell it? Where's it from? Who are you named after? What does your name mean? There's all these questions you could ask. People are actually flattered. Like we started this conversation talking about our last names, right? It's the name is the sweetest sound to a person's ears. And I remember I did this at a insurance company, largest insurance company here in the States. And the training director's name was Nankita. And I was like, wow, it's a beautiful name. And I did this in front of her coworkers. So it was like a couple hundred people. And I was like, what is it? How do you spell it? Where is it from? What does it mean? When I said, what does it mean? She didn't answer me. I was like, what does it mean? And she looked at her coworkers. It means graceful falling waters. I was like, wow, that's pretty beautiful. And then based on the reaction of her coworkers, I was like, how long have you worked here? She was like 7, 8 years. With all these people? Yeah, a lot of them were at my wedding. And I told her coworkers, I was like, out of 200 people, I said, how many of you knew that's what her name meant? And out of 200 people, how many people raised their hand? None. Right. And so I just feel, and then that ended up being a long-term client because the name is a gateway for so much more in a relationship. But my point here in saying this, you could ask about a person's name. And then finally, the V and the E. The V is visualize. And that's what I do when I memorize a lot of people's names, because I'm not like using it and saying, because I have to do it kind of quick. I visualize the person's name. And what does that mean? We generally think in pictures more than we do the real estate of our visual cortex is larger than other parts of our brain, right? And most of us are visual creatures. And a picture is worth 1,000 words, right? You go on an airplane, it doesn't say like no smoking anymore, fasten your seatbelt. There's a picture, right? And that's the universal language. In fact, we tend to remember things we see better than what we hear because you remember people's face, right? But you forget the name, right? You go to someone and say, I remember your face, but I forgot your name. You never go to someone and say the opposite. You never go to someone and say, I remember your name, but I forgot your face, right? But there's a proverb that says, what I hear, I forget. What I see, I remember. What I do, I understand. What I hear, I forget. Heard the name, forgot it. What I see, I remember. I saw the face, I remember it. And what I do, going back to the power of practice, you really understand. Because if you can't do it, you don't know it, right? But anyway, if you tend to remember what you see, then try seeing what you want to remember. So you take the name and you turn it into a picture and you just associate that picture of the person. So an example is if a person's name is Bob, I take for a split second, I imagine they're bobbing for apples. And the first thing people will say was, that's kind of childish. But who are the fastest learners on the planet? Children, right? They're playful. They make mistakes. They make fun of names. We grew up, right? I was, Nestle Kwik or, Kwik Slow. I'll call Jim Slow, right? There's just all these things. But that's how children learn. They're playful. If a person's name is Mary, just for a split second, imagine she's carrying 2 lambs underneath her arms. Mary had a little lamb. And that just reminds you. And the thing is, it works. Even when it doesn't work, it works because it gets you to focus on the person and focus on the name. And that observation and that attention is going to help you to remember the name. So a person's name is David. I just imagine flipping them in the nose with a slingshot for David and Goliath, right? And then a person's name's Carol. They're singing Christmas carols or whatever. Something that sounds like it. Because a lot of times people do this unconsciously. They forget a name and they'll start going, does it start with an A? Does it start with a B? Does it start with a C? And they get very nervous when it gets to W because there's not a lot of letters that are left. But sometimes it works, right? You come with E, Elliot. Right? But imagine having an actual picture. So people could easily go online and just search their country's top male names, 100 male names, 100 female names. And in the States, talk about working smart and sharpening the saw. If you come up with a picture for the first 100 male names, most popular male names, that's 60% of the people you're going to meet. For women, there's more variety. So that's the first 100 names is 40%. But you'll have an upset picture every single time that you're with somebody. So it's just a wonderful way to remember things better. And then finally, the E in suave is end. Always end the conversation saying goodbye with their name, right? Because if you could walk into a room of 20 strangers and leave saying goodbye to every single one of them by name, who are they all going to remember? They're all going to remember you, right? That's an absolute standout skill.
Did you do that? Do you do that? Have you looked at the top 100 names for men and women? Do you already have the pictures in your head? Then this is your toolkit. You already know what picture you're associating. You're not generating that picture in the moment. You already know.
Yeah. And if I meet unique people like Rudiger or Afzal, I'll make it up on the spot. Something that sounds like you're playing Pictionary. Remember the beginning Pictionary? You have to draw on a piece of paper or whatever, something that sounds like the person and get them to say it. So you can come up with something that just sounds close to it, similar to how people use a letter to remind them of the name. But yeah, that's a smart way of doing it. People say, well, that's a lot of effort. No, it's a lot of effort forgetting people's names all the time and having to ask 3 or 4 times. And it's not just effort, it's embarrassing. And so, and the technique is designed to overcome what I call the 6-second syndrome. When somebody introduces themselves and tells you that you have 6 seconds to do something with that name, otherwise it's gone. As soon as that handshake breaks, it's going right down to the floor, right? And so it gets you to focus on the person and focus on the name, and that's gonna, help you to better remember it for sure.
It's totally true.